folks. I'm joined here by Daniel Burke. Now, Daniel Burke is an activist. I know he's written articles, and he's actually running for the U.S. Congress in New Jersey. I have the pleasure of knowing not only Daniel, but also his wife and daughter, newborn daughter. And so I thought I might just do an interview here. So Daniel, I know you've been following the situation in Hong Kong, and I particularly wanted to talk to you about that. What do you make of the situation in Hong Kong? What's your analysis?
Well, it's very dangerous. That's my sense. I mean, this is not a matter of peaceful protests. They're violent. They're intentionally violent. And it's clearly being done from a geopolitical angle. I think that the purpose of these disruptions and this chaos, which is really a color revolution of a type, is to try to drive a wedge between the US and China and prevent any kind of a cooperative relationship, which could mean absolute disaster.
Yeah, one of the things that is getting glossed over that I've seen in a lot of alternative media, but just seems to be quickly glossed over in American media, is the whole reason that Hong Kong was seized by the British Empire was to punish China for trying to stop the importation of opium. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to 1842 when they started to call it British Hong Kong. And I mean, the idea that someone would say that somehow Hong Kong is not Chinese, or that somehow things were better under the British is a really ridiculous distortion of history. I mean, this is one of the worst crimes of the British Empire in that period, and it's widely understood that that was the 100 years of humiliation, where the Chinese were not able to repel the opium. They were not able to repel the gunboats of the British Empire. And so there's Chinese estimates that 100 million people died as a result of British actions in the Opium War, both killing people, the multiple opium wars, killing people, getting them hooked on opium. So when Xi Jinping speaks about how the century of humiliation is over, and we're moving forward, this is the context for that. The idea that they would put up with this kind of foreign interference, which I can share with you some of the details on this, but it's ridiculous. They're not going to do it.
Details, yeah.
Well, a lot of this has been published in Executive Intelligence Review, the LaRouche magazine, as well as there was a very good article or a very informative article by a guy named Dan Cohen that was published in Consortium News this week and on the Gray Zone. And I mean, it makes very clear that you're dealing with a clash of civilizations situation. Basically, the super media magnate Lai, who has been one of the primary financiers of this so-called democracy movement, he says when he sees he owns, like, he's like the Rupert Murdoch of Hong Kong, and he's widely recognized for financing this whole situation. He says, quote, "You have to understand the Hong Kong people, a very tiny 7 million or 0.5% of the Chinese population. We grew up in the Western values, which was the legacy of the British colonial past, which gave us the instinct to revolt once this extradition law was threatening our freedom. Even America has to look at the world 20 years from now, whether you want Chinese dictatorial values to dominate this world or you want the values that you treasure to continue." So first of all, the idea that the British Empire represents Western values is a total perversion. Lai is a friend of Milton Friedman, and he's a total von Hayeken who believes that mankind is nothing more than an animal, nothing more than a beast, and that we based our whole economic systems, whether we're Keynesian or von Hayeken, on that assumption, and therefore, therefore the British free trade throughout the world. Therefore, what they call is what they're looking at in terms of freedom. When they say democratic values, what they really mean is let the opium flow. In fact, as it is today.
Well, this extradition law, that's been, when I've argued about it with friends and people I know, people seem to think this is a struggle for human rights. This is about freedom of speech or freedom of religion or something like that. And I say, well, no, this is about an extradition law. And from what I understand, Hong Kong already has an extradition treaty with the UK, with the United States, but yet they want to set it up so that a part of China, Hong Kong, won't extradite people who break the law on the Chinese mainland to the Chinese mainland. And I tell people, like, is this like, like say Chicago in the United States had a rule that, hey, if you're from Chicago and you go to Indiana or you go to New York and you break the law, we just handle it in Chicago because we have a different tradition, a different legal system here. No country would tolerate that, right? And that Hong Kong is China. It is no longer a British protectorate. And yet I don't hear about this extradition law. But I guess what I'm getting to is the other thing that I'm seeing in the press is that the people that seem to be threatened the most by this extradition law, it's spelled out, are the business community. That's the term I'm seeing, business community, business owners. So what is that about? Why are they so afraid of the possibility of being extradited to the Chinese mainland?
I would look at it from the standpoint that it's a separatist operation. It's an intention to destroy the one country, two systems policy, the two systems, one country, one country, two systems. You're trying to get rid of it, right? Mm-hmm. And it's very clear that China considers this to be a fundamental part of their national security. I have a quote here from an article that was written up about the Chinese UN ambassador, Zhang, what he had to say about this, that China will never allow any country to interfere in China's internal affairs, especially on affairs relating to Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Tibet, and Taiwan. The two systems must not undermine China's sovereignty, territorial integrity, or the authority of the central government. And so it goes on from there. I mean, the point was that the extradition treaty was just used as an excuse to get this thing going. And now you're looking at a violent, chaotic situation, which is primarily designed, if you look at what the people who are leading these protests are doing, they're primarily trying to get action from the United States against China. So this guy Lai, he went in July and visited with John Bolton, and he visited with Mike Pompeo, and he visited with Nancy Pelosi, and Marco Rubio, and all these horrible members of the war party that are on both sides in the United States. And what they're saying, he and other representatives of this kind of operation, like a guy named Chan, who's one of the leaders of one of these parties, they're calling for the U.S. to take action in the trade war. They're literally saying, what we want you to do is to exacerbate the trade war with China. That's how you can help us get our democracy.
Wow. Yeah,
so
nothing creates democracy like wrecking economies and halting trade between countries, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that makes it pretty clear. Who could possibly, who would that benefit? You have to ask the cui bono question. Who would benefit from this kind of crisis? And the only people who would benefit are the people who have been trying to prevent this kind of cooperation between countries, prevent some kind of good resolution to the trade dispute. And that's people who represent the interests of Wall Street and the City of London.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to see these people are in an airport, for goodness sakes. I mean, in the United States, you can't protest in an airport. You can't, at this point, I don't even think you can leaflet in an airport. It used to be, people tell me years ago, people from different political organizations would hand out leaflets in airports. You can't do that anymore. So,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how is it that thousands of these people are in airports? I've seen video of them beating people up. Yes. I've seen them destroying property, and we're supposed to expect that China should just take this, right? I mean, we wouldn't tolerate such things in our airports, would we? I mean, in the United States?
Obviously not. No, I mean, the whole thing, we heard it on the radio. If you listen to the radio reports about this in the mainstream media, which has got tons of black propaganda against China, greatly increasing right now, right? They would just say that they had the protesters on speaking in English saying, we want to cause the police to commit violence on us.
Wow.
And that was, it's an engineered strategy, which goes to the people like Gene Sharp, who wrote up the whole policy on how to create a color revolution. They have little strategies on how to cause violence, on how to get support from the public and so forth, how to create massive amounts of publicity. But then if you look at the public face, what they're calling for, they have these huge signs: Donald Trump, President Trump, please liberate Hong Kong. Or I'm sure that you've noticed that Pepe the Frog is showing up in Hong Kong.
Yeah, what's that about? Explain that to me.
Well, the sort of mainstream representation of Pepe is that he's only an alt-right white nationalist, image. This cartoon frog. I don't really think that that's true. It's more broadly identified as a pro-Trump, image from people who are younger. It's not necessarily racist. There may be racists who do identify with it strongly, but the reason that they're doing this is to identify as trying to. I think it's pretty obvious that it's a cynical strategy and an effective one from what I've seen to try to get younger Trump supporters who would tend to be anti-interventionist, even though they are also have a hang up about hate, going against socialism, going against communism and so forth. They would tend to be anti-interventionist, and they would also tend to follow what Trump is doing more so than, the neocons. Trump has been generally quiet, although he's increasingly made errors on this, I think, that are very significant. And so they've been drawn into an anti-China, pro-Hong Kong democracy effort.
Are you referring to like the QAnon crowd?
Not merely, but like the people on the Donald, on the Reddit forum. I mean, the QAnon people are already far gone, so I don't think they have much. They've already been captured by some kind of an operation. But one way or another, you have an effort to get a vast xenophobia in the United States, greatly ramped up right now. There's these radical protests that are taking place in Moscow. We remember how Michael McFaul met with the people there to get the opposition moving. That's happening at exactly the same time. The Kashmir crisis has broken open at exactly the same time, and I don't have any sort of. I can merely say that I think it's a good hypothesis to begin to look at it from the standpoint of why are these things happening at the same time. I think it's part of a strategy of tension to try to create a geopolitical crisis in the world. The forces that believe that they benefit from this kind of strife between the US and China, and even from the discussion of a total decoupling of the economies, which you would think would be completely impossible to imagine. But Trump said in a tweet this morning, he said, we'd be better off without China, which seems to mean that he's giving some credence to this outrageous notion that you would basically carve the world up into two blocks, China and then US, and somehow we're going to be separate. It's a ridiculous idea. But the fact that these things are being discussed, I think, is a sign of how close we are to a major international financial crash. Mm-hmm. That what happens when you have chaos in the financial markets, when you have a breakdown of the system, like happened right before World War I, is that there's an effort to turn this into a geopolitical, even a war, crisis of that type, in order to maintain some control over it by the people in the City of London and Wall Street who have set it up.
Well, that actually brings us back to the United States when you talk about an economic crisis. I mean, what do you think are the signs that are pointing to that? And what do you think can be done about it? What has caused it? I mean, give me the lowdown on the U.S. economy, right? Trump says it's an economic miracle right now. I looked outside my window in Brooklyn where I live. I didn't see an economic miracle. I saw a lot of stores closing. I saw a lot of people struggling to pay their bills. What do you make of it?
I think it's a lot worse than the idea that we're headed into a recession, because you can see that there are people like Bill Maher who are sort of like, okay, as soon as something looks bad, then we can begin to blame it on Trump, and then maybe we can get rid of him and so forth. Those people are completely disingenuous. And Trump is he's not only is he wrong about this, but he's knowingly He's knowingly lying because he talked about these problems before he came into office. So I think this is an expression of a certain um, uncertainty about what's going to come next, about what's going to happen next. I mean, do you just play the game? He's thinking that he can play the game and keep lowering interest rates and keep supporting the bubble. And I'm not really sure what he thinks, but he's got to make a major shift, and we've got to make a major shift because there never was a recovery.
Yeah.
From 2008. I mean, if you look at the situation, 1 in 7 of the kids who go through New York City public schools will be homeless at some point in their school career.
Wow.
And you had a bit of a recovery in the manufacturing jobs in the first year and a half or so of Trump coming in. Is it's very dangerous. What they're talking about is essentially helicopter money again. BlackRock, the largest investment firm in the world, put out a statement that we should go towards basically direct deposits from the central banks into the accounts of speculators to support their ability to continue the bubble. And so they're talking about implementing a policy that can only lead to the kind of things that Hjalmar Schacht did, the finance minister in Germany, as in the lead into to Hitler's rise to power, which is they're going to force down austerity on the population and money printing, and act as though the money has some kind of a value. While meanwhile, the more of it that you print, the less of an effect that you get from it. And this is a process that's been going on for 50 years, because it was in 1971, 48 years ago, in August 15th, that the fixed exchange rate system of the Bretton Woods system collapsed, and we went into the floating exchange rate system. And that meant that that national governments, sovereign governments, no longer control the currency. And it's completely manipulated by people who are trading currency in the City of London and otherwise.
What's interesting, you talk about speculation, and I was recently reading some of the Roman Catholic Church's critique of capitalism back way a long time ago. And one of the reasons that they opposed initially capitalism, that the Catholic Church is they said that money is sterile, meaning that it cannot reproduce. And then the response of a lot of the Protestants, John Calvin and others, was to say, well, actually, oh, look, money creates houses, money creates jobs. And the church replied and said, well, actually, no. Money only creates value when it's combined with human labor. That's the only way that money can create value. And it seems to me like speculation is using money to get more money, where nothing's created, nothing solid is created, no work is being done, nothing's being produced. And that understanding long predates Karl Marx, long predates, Adam Smith. That goes way back to just a basic understanding that even in the time of the Roman Empire, people understood this, that when you're making money by having money, you're not actually creating anything. Am I onto something?
I think you are. I think that's well put. I mean, there's I never saw a dollar do pick up a shovel, and the money, or I mean, yeah, look at Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton said that gold and silver are nothing but dead stock. Don't presume that these markers of value, that the money has inherent value. The only thing that gives the way that our federal system was created under Hamilton's National Bank, if you read this in his 4 reports that he made to the Congress at the request of George Washington, the concept was that the value that our money refers to, to which our credit refers, is the increase of physical productivity that will come in the future. And so we extend long-term low-interest credit towards things that will create scientific and technological breakthroughs and things like platforms of infrastructure that will allow us to create increased productivity, like the Erie Canal or the transcontinental rail system or the great projects of the New Deal under Franklin Roosevelt. That he says explicitly that the stimulation of the creative powers of the human mind are the source of value. And so I think that, you know, there's a big crisis in the fact that the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, you know, I don't have the whole list in front of me, but there's a group that's starting up with something called the Green Finance Initiative, where what they're trying to do is to get an enormous amount of credit into wind and solar, not nuclear, wind and solar. And this is going to, they're trying to create another bubble. They're trying to create another bubble. But the worst problem of it is that by funneling money into things that have a lower intensity, lower effectiveness in terms of energy production, as opposed to a higher intensity and a higher effectiveness, as we see with nuclear power, thermonuclear fusion power, the fact that we're going down means that you're going to reduce the productivity. You're going to have a lower efficiency of the productive powers of your economy. And that's going to be combined with the fact that we're printing money. It's going to lead to an extremely dangerous situation.
Yeah, you know, it's very interesting. You know, I did hear, I saw reports that the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, has called for international cooperation around fusion energy. I think that's very exciting. Can you tell me about that?
Oh, it's wonderful. I mean, I guess this was in Yekaterinburg, early July, if I remember correctly. And he said that we need to oppose those who would stop human progress. I think this is his reference to the Malthusian tendency. Yeah, that is very dangerous right now. And he called for this international cooperation around fusion power. I mean, this is the kind of the seed crystal of how I think that we're going to address these enormous problems in the world economy. Namely, that if you have a vision for what we need in the next 40 to 50 years, if you say we need a world economy that is organized around the use of thermonuclear fusion power, if you say we're going to have tremendous breakthroughs in space capabilities such that we can industrialize the moon, such that we can begin to go on beyond to establishing a base on Mars, even the colonization of Mars in process. Once you can begin to think that way, then you can work backwards and recognize this can only happen with a cooperative relationship between the great powers of the world. And if those powers are going to work together on something that will succeed over 50 years, then they must reorganize the financial system so that the speculators are cut out and that productive investment is increased massively.
Wow. It sounds like you're going to have a very interesting Senate campaign. You know, I mean, the election's pretty far from now, but you're running as an independent, correct? You're neither a Democrat or a Republican.
I recently changed, Caleb.
Oh, okay. How are you going to run?
I'm going to be running as a Republican.
Wow. Well, there you go. Okay, so you're going to be in the Republican primary.
Yeah.
Now, who will be opposing you in the Republican primary?
There's a couple of people. There's no one that I don't mean any disrespect them, but I don't see anything significant about the opponents that I'm dealing with presently. You know, I mean.
Well, I'll be honest with you, Daniel. You don't sound like a typical Republican.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I mean, I think that, look, my view is that the really critical, and I think that most people think this, it depends on how you deal with it. The most interesting and significant political strata in the United States are the people who voted for Obama and then for Trump. And I meet people constantly who say, I've been a Democrat for 40 years, but now I'm a Republican. The point is that there's a certain sector of the population that actually is not partisan and is just trying to figure out what's best for the country.
Mm-hmm.
And they're somewhat defiant. They're not going to simply do what the parties tell them to do. And I want to reach those people. And right now, those people are Republicans. That's my experience.
Well,
yeah.
I hope to have you back. We can have more chats as your campaign continues. So all my best wishes to you. And I'm glad we were able to have this interaction about Hong Kong and many other things. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you, Caleb. Thanks very much. Take care.
Yep.